All right, we are finishing up Chapter 11, Common Approaches to the Existence of God from Mind Your Faith. And then we're moving on to Chapter 12, Naturalism and Darwinism. So we've got the last 3 or 4 questions left from Chapter 11. We've talked about the different arguments. The 4 arguments that Dewey presents in the chapter are the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the intelligent design argument, and then the moral argument. Those are the 4 that he deals with. Of course, the cosmological argument focuses on all things that had a beginning, or all things that had a beginning must have started from somewhere. Okay, for every cause, there is a reason for that cause. And so, since the universe is expanding, it must have started from a certain point, and so on and so forth. What is teleology? Why is the teleological argument important? So what does teleology deal with?
Here says design and purpose.
Design and purpose. Okay. And the specific example from William Paley that Dewey brings out is the watch and the watchmaker. And we talked about that example, that if an ancient human can't stumble across a pocket watch, they may not know where it came from, they may not know how it works, but they would know, based on its design, that somebody created it, that this was not something natural. And it's in that section he talks about the evidence of fine-tuning, where the gravity is just right, Earth is just right from the sun, the amount of energy is just right. All of these things are just right, just so happened to enable life to be available on Earth. So teleology, that argument, why is it important?
In evolution, if you go on any Big Bang, anything like it, has no design. I mean, there was nothing.
There's nothing to explain the design,
yeah.
Right? In fact, teleology deals with these regularities or laws in the universe that just happened to be in place. Well, why is the universe that way? Why is it that it has these laws ordained within it that just so happened to happen? And that's kind of the focus of the teleological argument. And within the example that Dewey gives us, it's more of a broader aspect compared to, why do you think the newer intelligent design theory has made an impact? If the cosmological argument and the teleological argument deal with kind of the broad existence of creation and of the universe, the laws that govern it, intelligent design, at least the example that Dewey gives, what example does he give? Of was he a chemical biologist? He described the cell and how that the entire basis of macroevolution particularly deals with the idea of single-celled organisms evolving into complex organisms. However, even within a single cell, as the most basic cell as you can get, there are complex systems that if you take those out, it can't function. So it had to pop into existence as is for it to function, if that's the case of evolution. And so the concept of intelligent design focuses on the design that can be tested and shown. In fact, that's one of the points that Dewey makes within that section, is that this is something testable. It's quantifiable. Not that teleology isn't, but this focuses more on exact concepts like the cell to show that how is this possible without having designed it. And of course, also within that section, he talks about Antony Flew, who was a well-known atheist who changed his mind. He decided, you know what? On the basis of the evidence, and I'm not sure if Dewey was saying specifically the intelligent design theory or if all of them maybe together, led him to believe that there must be a higher power. Now, he didn't necessarily say Jehovah, but a higher power or a higher mind involved in the creation of all things.
They just follow running behind teleology.
They all kind of flow together. Yeah, it's a little hard to distinguish between particularly teleology and the newer intelligent design, Dewey says that it's really almost a subset of teleology. The way Dewey describes it is that intelligent design theory has taken teleology further than where it was before. And whether that means more specifically, more scientifically, and I think that's where he's going with this question, is why do you think the newer intelligent design theory has made an impact? Because it's more scientific in its observations. I think is probably generally what Dewey's going for with that question, because that's the point that he makes about intelligent design theory, is that it focuses specifically on the science of design and on the fact that these things could not have happened without a designer. Whereas more broad observations may be involved in, obviously, the cosmological and the teleology. Thoughts through that? Last question. Why do you agree or disagree with the moral argument? How would you talk to someone else about morality? Remember that section about the moral argument focuses not just on why do we have a standard of morality, but upon what basis do we continue to have a standard of morality? It's not just that man has always had a standard of morality, seemingly, but that despite our enlightened minds, now that we've all accepted atheism, why do we continue to believe that there is a standard of right and wrong? Why are some things left in the category of being criminal, like murder or stealing, as opposed to saying, well, you know what? I'm going to create my own morality or my own standard, which allows for murder and allows for stealing. Upon what basis does an atheist make that argument? And that's kind of where he's going. Do you agree or disagree with the moral argument? And of course, he's looking at it from the perspective of somebody, a Christian, making the argument that morality wouldn't exist without God. Okay, and of course, I think all of us, I assume, would agree with that argument. That man by himself would have no position of authority to, first of all, dictate for himself, much less dictate for others, what is right and wrong. Whereas God does have that authority. And in fact, the consistency of morality, generally speaking, obviously in some cultures some things are right and others are wrong, but from a pattern that we see going all the way back in history, there is consistent evidence of law. Okay, the Code of Hammurabi is a common example that is brought up. In fact, most people think the Code of Hammurabi was the baseline for the Old Testament, which, if you're a Christian and you believe in the Old Testament as being written by God through Moses, then we know that the Old Testament existed before the Code of Hammurabi. For that matter, the patriarchal law existed before the Code of Hammurabi. But regardless, that being the case, if you've got this, for instance, the Code of Hammurabi, which dictates, here's not just law. Okay, the Code of Hammurabi doesn't just dictate civil law, it dictates, to a certain extent, standards of morality. Okay, and that has been consistent throughout civilizations, going all the way back in recorded time. Why is that? Okay, now there are one argument I can foresee somebody making is that there are certain rules that lend themselves to a civilized society. Okay, like murder. Allowing murder or thinking murder is okay may not lend itself to a civilized society. But all that basically is saying is that peer pressure has convinced everybody that murder's wrong, because otherwise we wouldn't have a society. It's not saying that murder's wrong because it's wrong. It's saying it's wrong because then we wouldn't have society. And the same is true for stealing or anything else. So the fact that we have a moral code that is fairly consistent, the fact that we continue to have, even atheists have a moral code, despite the fact that there is no afterlife from an atheist perspective. We're just animals. Okay, we should live like animals. We should give ourselves to our primal nature, and yet there are certain things that are wrong. And so that's kind of the basis upon which the Dewey approaches that argument. And is asking that question. Thoughts through that one? Yes, sir.
Well, even with criminals, there is a moral code. It's very narrow.
Sure.
Code, it's saying those stitches get stitches, the big moral code
Yeah.
of criminals. But then, having worked inside of a jail and things, that's the big moral code. Is you
Sure.
don't talk. If something happens, you keep your mouth shut. And so even to that effect, there is a form of morality that they have within
Right.
themselves.
Certain rules that they follow. Honor among thieves. Okay, sometimes no matter what brand of morality or how lenient or how lax or how restrictive their code of morality is, everyone has certain rules. And that's the point that Dewey makes about atheists, that there are certain lines you don't cross. Why? Why is that? That's going too far. That would be wrong. Upon what basis do you argue wrong? If it's just a social construct, then nobody can tell you it's wrong. And that's really his point about morality. There is no morality if there is no God. We might as well just do what we want. Which, ironically, you see a lot more of in today's society than before. A lot of the reason is because there's a lot of people shirking the concept of morality. Even though there's still things that are criminal, okay? A lot of times people try to argue it away or excuse that behavior because of other situations.
They talk about your primates going back to being animals.
Yeah.
Animals have a moral code too within each species.
There are certain rules they follow. Yeah.
There's hierarchy and there's
That's true.
love, affection. There's
That's
care,
true.
protection. There's a moral code there too. So
Yeah. That's true. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. You're right. Even within animals, there are certain rules, certain behaviors that are standard, and rarely are those deviated from. It's a good point. All right, anything else through chapter 11? All right, let's move on to chapter 12, Naturalism and Darwinism. All right. So Dewey doesn't go into talking about Charles Darwin particularly. He talks about Darwinists. These are individuals who have based an entire philosophy about the observations or surrounding the observations that Darwin made in Origin of Species and so forth. It's important to note that in his autobiography, Darwin made the point that he had no intention, and it kind of bothered him that people considered him an atheist, because he said, when I look at the expansive design of things, it's hard for me to picture all of this having happened by chance. And he makes the case, he says, I deserve to be called a theist. Not necessarily that he believed in Jehovah, the God of the Bible, but that he did believe that there was a first cause, as he called it, being a higher intelligence, a higher power, or God. So it is interesting that despite Darwinists' attempt to kind of make Charles Darwin ultimately the father of not just evolution, but the father of atheists, really, that even Charles Darwin didn't believe that this could have all happened by chance. Dewey doesn't go into the detail about Charles Darwin and his background. He just focuses on the arguments that we face from these types of people. Now, just show of hands, has anybody actually encountered a self-proclaimed Darwinist? I'm guessing not. I've never come across a self-proclaimed Darwinist. Generally speaking, people don't really introduce themselves as Darwinists. However, have you come across people who believe in evolution? Okay, generally speaking, those who carry the banner of evolution, particularly on the scientific side, they would be considered Darwinists. Whether they realize it or not, that's what they would be considered. Particularly naturalists. In fact, the point that Dewey makes is naturalism is the philosophy or the faith upon which Darwinists make their arguments. Okay, it's not that they're one and the same, it's that naturalism, or the explanation that the idea that nature can explain everything that exists, it is that faith that Darwinism is based on. Okay, this is the observations upon which they go about determining things, because there can't be a God when it comes to naturalism. Because science, nature explains the existence of all things. We don't need a God to explain everything. So the first section of chapter 12 really deals with the issue of understanding science versus scientism. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. Science can be good or bad. Okay, in fact, he's going to define science here in just a minute. Science is not right or wrong. It's a focus on observing the natural world. Whereas scientism is something a little bit different. So Dewey starts out, he quotes Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, Genesis 1:1 is the basis of the Christian worldview, and it stands in contrast to naturalism and the atheistic view of the general theory of evolution. Evolution is the leading naturalistic idea for how all of the animals and people of this world came to be in their present condition. The scientific establishment typically teaches naturalistic Darwinian evolution as a fact. Now, it's important to remember that there are clear definitions for the differences between a scientific fact, a scientific theory, and a scientific hypothesis. So I looked up some definitions, okay, just to kind of include this in the discussion. This isn't in the chapter, but I thought this was really important to realize. To my surprise, every one of the definitions, at least from a scientific, like discovery.com, and there was even I forget the name of the website, it was a teacher website, it was actually teaching material for a class. Both of them had, or all of them had, definitions that included the idea of evolution, which I thought was very telling given the fact. As a noun, a theory is a group of tested general propositions. Notice the term tested, okay? General propositions commonly regarded as correct that can be used as principles of explanation and prediction for a class of phenomena. This is what is known as a scientific theory, which by definition is an understanding that is based on already tested data or results. Now notice how they apply this. Einstein's theory of relativity and the theory of evolution are both examples of such tested propositions. Now that definition is going to be very important given what Dewey is going to talk about regarding that very claim that this is a tested and proved theory. Okay? Dewey's going to talk about that. He's going to deal with the idea of the claim of evolution being a tested theory. Hypothesis is a noun that means a proposition or set of propositions set forth as an explanation that describe some specified group of phenomena. While it sounds similar, this hypothesis is before testing. It can still be tested, generally speaking. A scientific hypothesis is made before testing is done. It is the basis for further investigation. So from a hypothesis perspective, there's a lot of things that are called fact in theory that really should be called hypothesis. Why do you think scientifically a lot of people don't refer to certain things like the theory of evolution as the hypothesis of evolution? Why do you think that is? Okay, it makes it sound less authoritative, doesn't it? It makes it sound less stable. And I think they use that for that particular reason. So a scientific fact, in science, a fact is an observation that's been confirmed so many times that scientists can, for all intents and purposes, accept it as true. Now this is Discovery.com's definition of hypothesis and theory. Hypothesis is a tentative explanation about an observation that can be tested. So when we talk about macroevolution, which Dewey's going to, can macroevolution, never mind having been tested, can it be tested? No. Therefore, it doesn't really even qualify as a hypothesis either. And that's really the point that I want to stress here, is that when you talk about certain scientific principles that are based on observation of certain established facts and then extrapolated out with their own interpretation of those facts, okay, the universe being 13 billion years old, okay, I believe that that's the case. I believe that the universe is 13 billion years old. Now, how as a Christian can I believe that? I believe God created it to be 13 billion years old. Okay? That is my interpretation of the facts at hand. Whereas other scientific ideas extrapolate or interpret from that same fact of the universe 13 billion years old, that evolution, there's a big bang, and then evolution took over, and so forth. So that's a hypothesis that can be tested. There are certain things you can't test. You're just speculating. It's just a starting point for further investigation. Theory. This is very important. I thought this was really interesting. Again, this is from discovery.com. In science, a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural world that can incorporate facts, laws, inferences, and tested hypotheses. A theory is the granddaddy of all scientific statements, which is why it makes no sense to say that evolution is just a theory. As Joe Hansen puts it in his video for It's Okay to Be Smart, stop saying it like a bad thing. Calling it a theory means it's passed the toughest tests that we can throw at it, and evolution has been tested maybe more than any theory that we know of. That just blew my mind when I read that, because I understand where he's coming from. I understand what he's saying here, and Dewey helps us to understand what this guy's saying. But it's very disingenuous, it's very deceptive what he's saying and on the basis for which he's saying it. Because I don't disagree with his point. I disagree with his application. And we'll see that here in a minute. Richard Dawkins, so this is going back to what Dewey talks about. Richard Dawkins, an atheist, wrote that evolution is as much a fact as the heat of the sun. It is not a theory, and pity's sake, let's stop confusing the philosophically naive by calling it so. Evolution is a fact. But this is when you start asking yourself, okay, well, what do you mean by evolution? And the fact Dewey is going to encourage us to ask people that very question when they make this type of statement. What do you define for me what you mean by evolution being a fact? Because that's going to be very telling how they define evolution. There's a big difference between saying something is a fact and proving it to be so. Naturalism is based upon philosophical presuppositions, namely that nature and its processes can explain everything in our physical world. Science is a legitimate attempt to derive knowledge from observation, testing, and experimentation based upon repeatable phenomena. There's nothing wrong with science. While science is legitimate, scientism is not. Scientism is the underlying presupposition that in order to be true knowledge, any discipline had to be science, implicitly pursued in the manner of the natural sciences. And if it's not pursued in that manner, then it's not real knowledge. It's illegitimate knowledge. Thoughts or comments through the point so far? Sometimes science is equated to naturalism. However, naturalism, the idea that nature alone is capable of explaining everything, cannot itself be scientifically demonstrated. And I love how Dewey is pointing out within the confines of our definitions of both a hypothesis and a theory, is that it revolves around the ability to test and show that this is true. Okay, you can repeat it and show it to be true. Whereas naturalism, the basis that nature alone has created everything, you can't prove that. You can extrapolate an interpretation from the given set of facts, but you can't prove that. Just like I believe that God created everything, but can I prove that scientifically? No. Neither can I disprove that God has created everything. If God cannot be proved by science, neither can naturalism be proved by science. As Ian Hutchinson, a nuclear physicist, put it, what needs to be opposed is bad logic. It is not science, but scientism, the unjustified belief that all useful knowledge is science. I thought that was a really interesting point, because if that's true, all useful knowledge is science, what does that automatically exclude? Huh? Faith or God's Word. Is God's Word science from a scientific perspective? Is God's Word a scientific textbook? No. And so automatically, any knowledge that is gained outside of the realm of the natural sciences isn't real useful knowledge. While the Bible is not meant to be a scientific textbook, science does not inherently conflict with Scripture. The interpretations and philosophies of some scientists differ with interpretations of the biblical text, but this is not the same as science versus the Bible. And despite the narrative that is consistently labeled science versus the Bible, I really appreciate Dewey making that point, that it's the interpretations of some scientists versus interpretations of the Bible that conflict. It's not science versus the Bible. The same is true with science versus faith. The issue is not science versus faith either. It is the faith of some versus the faith of others. Everyone has faith, including those who profess naturalism. Thoughts or comments through that section? Yes, sir.
1 Timothy 6:20 talks about knowledge that's falsely called the definition there
Yep.
includes science. If you go back and look at a dictionary from the 1800s, science is not restricted to just what, that's the scientific method. It's general knowledge.
Yeah.
So a lot of it goes back to definitions.
Right. Well, and again, there's nothing wrong with science. There's nothing wrong with observing our natural world, understanding the laws that I believe God has instituted in it. There's nothing wrong with that. Science is neither good nor bad. It's just observable phenomena and making understanding or forming understanding from it. It's the interpretation then of that phenomena, interpretation of scientific facts, that then goes way outside of even the realm of calling something a hypothesis, much less a theory. So Dewey is going to then define evolution, or help us to help others define evolution. There's macro and micro. Macroevolution is the idea that all present life forms, that includes plants and animals, have developed over millions of years from a single common ancestor, not human, but single common ancestor, single cell, as a result of unguided processes. It refers to changes in the kinds of animals and plants on Earth, changes that take place over long periods of time, with new forms replacing old ones. Okay? The idea goes like this. We've all heard it. At some point in the past, billions of years ago, an explosion, the Big Bang, though, as we've actually talked about lately, the Big Bang has been greatly challenged, gave rise to the universe, and eventually planet Earth was born. Among the chemicals present or introduced, as some have made the statement that an asteroid hit and introduced new chemicals to create life, were those that make life possible. The conditions were just right, and a single living organism developed from the existing matter. Other organisms then came from the first one, and these organisms began to take on various characteristics in response to their environment. Because of their ability to adapt and change, new forms arose and changes continued. Through the process of natural selection over billions of years, all living organisms evolved into their present state. That is basically what kids are taught in school. This is the basic story that kids are taught in school, that this is what science teaches. Okay? Microevolution refers to smaller, limited changes within a kind of organism. Within a given kind, there are variations that arise from generation to generation. For example, dogs. We've got tons of different species of dogs, okay, or variations of dog. But are they still dogs?
Breeds, not different species.
Sorry, different breeds. Yes, thank you. Different breeds of dogs. Okay, we have different breeds of cats, but they're all dogs. They're all cats. Okay, they're all still in their same kind or their same form, even though they have variations within that form. While the evidence for limited variations is readily seen, the evidence that they arose from a completely different type of animal is missing. Vast speculation, not observation, is what then fills the gaps. So, and he's even going to mention, that the picture that we've all seen, I'm sure, at some point, of monkey and then the stages of human evolution arising to Homo sapiens. Okay, what's filling those gaps, however, is this speculation, because you cannot prove that man came from monkey. And even though Dewey doesn't talk about this particularly, it still creates the question, why do we still have monkeys? Why do we still have humans, but we have nothing in between? Now, their argument is natural selection. We killed them off. We killed off the Neanderthals and so forth. But in the end, it's not just humans that we're talking about. Why don't we see different forms of dog? Not just different breeds, but different forms of what became dog. We have variations, but we don't have its ancient precursor. So, and to my knowledge, I don't know if they've ever even found bones of things like that. Darwinists will often appeal to microevolution as proof of macroevolution. They believe that microevolution provides the mechanism and explanation of how macroevolution occurs. However, they rarely make the differentiation between micro and macro. And this is why these explanations that evolution is fact, that's why I can understand the basis upon which they're saying that. Variation within a species is fact. Okay? You have breeds. However, one might argue evolution has been shown to occur in laboratory tests, thus evolution is true. This is deceptive. What it means is that microevolution has been shown to occur, therefore macroevolution must be true. The fact that there are variations within species is the very point that Charles Darwin actually observed at the Galapagos Islands and so forth. He observed variation within species, oftentimes based on environment. Polar bears are white, grizzly bears are brown. Why do you think that is?
It's their environment.
Yeah, it's their environment. Human beings that live at higher temperatures have been shown to have developed higher ability to handle the less oxygen than people at sea level. Does that mean that they're in the middle of evolving into a new form of human? No. There are environmental factors, there are other factors involved that dictate variations. That has nothing to do with changing forms. Microevolution is true, but all it proves is that limited changes occur within given kinds. It does not prove that kinds have mindlessly changed into different kinds. When people say that evolution is true, ask them what they mean by evolution. I thought that would actually be an interesting experiment, is if it happened to come up, evolution, ask them what they mean. If they are defending evolution, or they're saying, how can you believe in God, evolution, yada yada, define evolution. Are they gonna make the distinction between micro and macro? And if they do, okay, well, I'm with you on microevolution. I will agree with you on microevolution. I believe there are variations within species. But prove to me that macroevolution is true. Right, they can't. They base it on the idea of variations within species, therefore there must be variations through species. And that's not how it works. Well, at least we don't see evidence of that. Any thoughts or comments?
Through my college studies and stuff, it's what's they're saying. It's not what it is. It's what you call it.
Yeah.
You know, they're calling macro and micro, but really those are not probably very good terms for either one.
Yeah.
Because macro is a change of genetics, a change of,
right.
of things that are there. But they call it macro and micro. Well, that kind of sounds the same. So it's just logically one goes to
say evolution. Yeah.
Doesn't. And I didn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, and professors, some very well-known professors in their fields that I worked under, studied under. I don't know anyone that was an atheist.
Really?
Yes, not one.
Wow.
And more than one in classes would say that it started somehow.
Yeah.
And so, me, I'm going to say, I'll leave that up to you. But I had others that said, I'm going to tell you, God started this.
Yeah.
And we're just dealing with what he made us.
Well, and that's a great point, because the narrative is that highly educated, high-degree people don't believe in God. And that's not true. There are a lot of highly intelligent, multiple PhDs and so forth, individuals who believe in God. Some of which are actually Christians. There's a Christian in San Antonio that's got more degrees than we have fingers, okay? And he's an elder in one of the churches in San Antonio. So the idea that highly educated people can't believe in God is ridiculous. Ben?
I was just going to say, I have a professor that believed in evolution and pretty much said if you believe in God, you're unintelligent.
Yeah, that's the narrative, though. How can you believe in God? How can you be intelligent and believe in God? And yet, despite the narrative, that's not the truth. Anything else? Biblically, the concept of microevolution is acceptable and even implied by the text. In Genesis chapter 1, all living things were created after their kinds. I include 1 Corinthians 15, verses 38 through 41. Doy didn't, but I felt it fit as well. They were given certain bodies for their kind by God. Paul talks about this in describing the resurrection one day. He talks about how all things of flesh are given certain kinds, certain forms. Birds of their kind, animals of their kind, man of his kind. It's interesting that Paul distinguishes between animal and man. He made from one every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, Acts 17:26. We may infer that God placed within Adam and Eve, and I included in brackets here because I included this, and maintained until at least Noah and his family, the genetic pool necessary to bring about the varieties of people. And this is actually something I had thought about. I hadn't read chapter 12 before, but this is a conclusion I'd come to, and then to read it from what Doy's saying, I was like, yeah. The idea that Adam and Eve, and even all the way to Noah and his family, that their genetic material, their genetic pool contained all of the variations of human being that we now see. Okay, all the different ethnicities, all the different variations of man, all were contained within Adam and Eve and Noah and his family. And no matter how many generations existed between Adam and Noah, that genetic pool was maintained, I believe. And I think a lot of it had to do with the environmental conditions before the flood, because we see people living almost 1,000 years before the flood, but then after the flood, what happens? Gradually, people start living less and less and less. Something changed, I believe, in the environment after the flood. And of course, at that point, it seems like the genetic pool then started to diversify. The same is true of plants and animals. Okay, people talk about how could Noah fit all of the different types of animals in the ark? When in fact, really all you needed was the basis, a couple, upon which one form had. Okay, whether it was a form like wolf. Okay, wolf would be generally considered the ancestor of what we now have as dogs as well. But they're still the same form. And the same would have been true for rhinoceros or whatever else. Okay, you have these basic forms from which we now have variations of those forms. But that doesn't make it a change in their species. Thoughts or comments through that? While the Bible supports variations within a kind, it does not support the crossing of kinds. So now he begins to focus on naturalism and Darwinism and the issues that are involved with it. It's a theory without God. Darwinism is not friendly to the notion of God's existence or work in the world. For example, consider the American National Association of Biology Teachers' official statement regarding evolution. The diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution, an unsupervised, impersonal, unpredictable, and natural process of temporal descent by temporal descent, what do they mean? Over the course of millions of years. Okay, temporal, dealing with time. Descent, meaning lineage or changing in time. With genetic modification that is affected by natural selection, chance, historical contingencies, and changing environments. Now note the terms that are used. In fact, Dewey specifically brings out all these specific terms: unsupervised, impersonal, unpredictable, natural process, temporal descent. There is no room for God in the definition. Quote from Raven and Johnson that Dewey includes: Darwin was able to arrive at a successful theory when many others had failed because he rejected supernatural explanations for the phenomena that he was studying. Again, that statement is deceptive. What Charles Darwin observed was variations within a species. Charles Darwin, in his autobiography, says, I'm not an atheist. I deserve to be called a theist. I believe there was a first cause for things. They extrapolate, however, from that microevolution, the existence of macro, but then attribute that same thing to Charles Darwin. Julian Huxley explained natural selection as that which converts accident into apparent design. I thought that was somewhat comical. Randomness into organized pattern. So really what you see as design and organized pattern has actually come from accident and just random chance, is really the argument. Evolutionist Michael Ruse wrote, the very last thing that Darwin and his followers were trying to do is put mind into nature. The idea that there was an intelligence involved in nature. Despite some claims that they are not trying to say anything about religion or God, they imply that everything that exists does so apart from and without God. They are unwilling to consider intelligent contributions to design. But that's ultimately the basis of their worldview. It's not because they can prove it. It's because that's what they want to believe. However, naturalism is a philosophy that cannot be substantiated by science. No scientific test through experimentation and observation can prove that nature is all there is, and that nature alone is responsible for all things. This makes naturalism a faith. They trust what they cannot see or scientifically prove as much as any theist. It is a double standard that insists that naturalism is the default explanation for everything, while demanding scientific proof from theists that there is a God. I thought that was a really good point that he makes. It is a double standard. It's hypocrisy to say that our belief is the belief. You've got to prove yours, but they don't have to prove theirs. I thought that was a really good point. Thoughts or comments through that? All right. There is an information problem. If you read through this and you were confused, you might have had to read over it 2 or 3 times, because what he deals with is hard to quantify here, talking about the information problem. Evolutionists will argue what they are teaching is not about origins, but before evolution can begin to work, there must be an accounting for the first life forms. Again, if everything started from a single cell, where did that single cell come from? As Stephen Meyer wrote, no undirected physical or chemical process has demonstrated the capacity to produce specified information starting from purely physical or chemical precursors. Some of these terms can kind of, make it confusing, but when you read information here, it's the information that is ultimately within genetic code, genetic DNA. The information that has ultimately guided or guides our processes. Okay, everything within a human, from our form to our ability to think, all of that exists. Now, how does that exist? Where does that information come from? It had to come from somewhere. For this reason, chemical evolutionary theories have failed to solve the mystery of the origin of first life, a claim that few mainstream evolutionary theorists now dispute. They won't even argue that. No, we don't know where first life came from, but that doesn't really matter. All right. So we will stop there and we will pick up. We're a little bit past halfway through the chapter. So we'll pick up here next week with chapter 12. We'll cover the questions and maybe get into chapter 13 as well. All right, everybody. Thank you.